draws the best of people and it draws the worst of people. And you have to be very careful about who you hire, who you retain, and how you train them, because there's all sorts of liability that also comes with that. Leaving alone the fact that a community is going to be abused in the hands of the wrong choice. So they need to equip, students need to equip themselves with a very clear understanding of ethics, and if they don't think that they can live up to the ethics required for law enforcement, then they need to find another profession, because you're going to have a lot of authority and a badge and a gun, and lives depend on it. And the second aspect, again, is I try to push that protect and serve thing with them often. And part of that is, I think if you think about the ethical issues that you encounter in your own life, set aside law enforcement for a minute, but sometimes you think you're doing the ethical thing, to you inside it's the ethical thing, but somebody else sees it, and perceptions then become realities if people want it to become realities. So you always have to even appear to be beyond reproach. Not just be beyond reproach, but everything you do must be beyond reproach. So you can't take gratuities or free meals or anything like that, or anything that would give the wrong appearance. So these are the points that I think we all try to make in the classroom.
Thank you. And now for the chiefs and lieutenant dukes, now when you're hiring, because we know not everybody's meant to be in law enforcement, but not everybody's meant to be a police officer. How does ethics come into your hiring process? What type of screening is done when someone applies to come into law enforcement?
I can tell you with our department, we have a very, very thorough hiring process. Does that mean that people can't get through the cracks? No, absolutely, there is those opportunities. But a lot of what we do a very thorough background check. We call references. We look through work histories. We talk to previous employers. We do credit checks. We want to ensure that this person's not coming into a profession and they have issues with money that could lead them to do unethical things. We also do a lot of, it used to be the polygraph test, but we do some kind of deception test, voice stress analysis, or a polygraph, where they're asked questions that deal with ethical situations and see how they react. And then one of our last things that we'll go through is the psychological. And believe it or not, we do lose applicants during the psychological process. It will come back that this person appears to have a type of background who could lead them to do unethical or criminal behavior, and they won't be hired on with us. But then our other part too is, once they're hired on, the other part of ethical is that your whole department, everybody that works with you, knows that they're going to be held to a higher standard. And part of their job is to ensure that their peers and their partners are held to that standard as well. Anybody, I always say, if you put this badge on and this patch, you want to be the best of the best. And it takes one mistake to ruin that image. And we have to be very serious about that as we go through the hiring process. And they begin their employment with us.
Well, I echo the same thing she said. We do the same processes pretty much that they have. The one thing that I've added since I came to VSU was the last piece we do is an interview with the chief. And the reason I do it, because I don't ask anything about policing at the end of the day, I'm just trying to determine what their emotional intelligence are. I'm looking to figure out what their want is, what they're really truly trying to be. And that's a piece that I think is really different than I've seen in some of the interviews I've done throughout my career. And it really brings the foundation on they prepared to come into this. And then I'll speak to the training part. I ran an academy for 5 years as well, and the one thing that they might can get through the whole process, and they can really bring through the interviews and stuff, and then when they hit the academy, the one thing that we would really like to do is make sure we put them under stress, see how they're truly going to act in that moment, and that sometimes can sort of show some ethical problems or some moral issues, and you won't really know that until you put them under that intense stress. And I know stress, sometimes they broke and they did things that you wouldn't want to see one of us did.
Really don't know how much more I can add to that, because as far as bringing somebody inside an agency, there is standards to be set, and agencies follow those standards as far as, your background checks. But Chief Keith brought up a great point as far as under stress is what you really see people's character come out in. And of course, you can't simulate real stress. You can't simulate the real things that happen on the street, because they are in a training environment. You cannot simulate, the baggage that someone brings in from their household, whatever happened at their house, now they're in the patrol car, now they're answering calls to someone else's house. And you can't simulate all those things that go on in someone else's head, then the real incident occurs. But during training, you can do your best to simulate that. And under stressful conditions, that's the real person where that shows. Also, which I imagine is no different than the other two agencies that are represented here. During the orientation, when we're bringing them in, I have a lot of conversations with the new hires, and I try to be very friendly and get them to loosen up and talk. And there are times I'm not a priest. I'm not privileged conversations. If I start hearing things from them, that is something I'm reporting up to the chain of command. Hey, listen, this is what I've heard from this person. This is what I'm getting from this person. Make sure the FCOs know, hey, listen, when you're out on calls, please pay particular attention to whatever maybe we saw. Because we want to make sure that after they are turned loose, that they're representing the agency the way they need to be represented.
And now, staying along the same kind of lines, can you discuss, just, and it's going to be for all of you guys, if whoever would like to answer, the on-duty ethics versus off-duty ethics? Are there certain policies set in place? And the example that I like to use all the time is bless my husband's heart. He is in law enforcement, and he enjoys an adult beverage from time to time, and I'm sure a lot of people do, but he will not go into a liquor store, he will not purchase alcohol if he is in his badge or in his unmarked patrol car. Is that just an unspoken standard that is set, or is that something that is an official policy that is implemented across the board?
So that is a softball question. That if anybody answers anything other than absolutely should be in a policy. So you on or off duty, especially if you're on duty, if you're under your badge, as it were, then anything that brings a perspective of anything other than the highest standards, then you should be held accountable to. The liquor store thing, that's an issue. That's like a 1965 cop thing right there.
So I won't give him a hard time.
Grab more on the way to the house, right? Yes, that's absolutely incorrect. The other part of that question, though, was as far as ethics on and off duty. And the way our policy is written in the sheriff's office is a little bit different because the head of our agency is an elected official. It's the sheriff, he's the highest ranking law enforcement official in the county, and we are deputies, and that means that in the absence of the sheriff being present, we act in his authority. All right? So my conduct off duty is still a representation of the sheriff. And that's one of the things that we hit with our people, or I should say hit, I guess that's probably bad, or during ethics thing, but that's one thing we reinforce is that, yes, you're off duty, you're not getting paid, but everybody that you know knows who you work for. And so if your conduct is that type of conduct that you're responding to when you're on duty, then you're not holding that standard that you're expected to hold. And you are going to take away from the agencies being able to effectively and be legitimate in their job. So, DPD would be different.
I was trying to get some ground to get off on that.
Well, I can tell you, your husband, we do have a very strict policy on not going into any type of establishment while having your badge, driving your police car, having your like Lieutenant Duke said, whether you're on duty or off, there really isn't a difference. You're recognized 24/7, and I tell our new recruits when they come in, when they do their last interview with me, is you're going to arrest someone. They're always going to remember you. You're never going to remember them. So when you're in Walmart, or you're at a bar, or you're at a friend's house, or you're putting something on social media, they know who you are, even though you might not know them. So the images and what you're doing still reflects poorly. It reflects poorly on our department if you're violating our code of conduct policy. Because you truly are, really, in this profession, you're doing it 24/7. So you always got to make sure that you're not doing anything. I always tell them, don't do anything that you don't want your mother or grandmother to see you do. And that it usually gets their attention pretty good.
I'll echo the same thing they both said. I mean, there's really not much more to it to say that no matter what, 24/7, it's the same responsibility, it's the same code of conduct. You're always going to hold yourself to a higher standard.
One small addition from ancient history, there was an occasion down in Tampa, Ellsworth County, in which one of our deputies, he wasn't a real good deputy anyway, but this may indicate he was overall. He was in an unmarked car, but he was in a uniform. And he parked 2 blocks away in the parking lot of the drugstore and took his uniform shirt off. Okay? And it's got a belly lock at the trunk, all that's weird. His uniform shirt is off and he walks the 2 blocks to a liquor store. He didn't realize that he had the uniform pants on, which were forest green with big not something you see people wearing. The other thing I'll add now, and I may come up in the questioning in a bit, is, and it was mentioned by the chief, was social media. You know, you got to be your cop. You got to be careful of what comes out your mouth, and that includes social media. The policy used to be, and I think it still is in terms of the requirements in Florida, is that law enforcement should not have political opinions, should not, well, you can have, but you can't say them. You shouldn't do that, because you don't want to give the impression that you're serving one half of the community but not the other. And as divisive this world is today, you can see why that's important. But in social media, you got to be very careful. And sad to say, I've seen some sheriffs in Florida making social media posts that they really probably shouldn't have posted. They were political in nature. And we, just like the military, you got to kind of stay away from that if you can, because you don't want to get the impression. Remember what I said about impressions becoming reality with regard to ethics. So you're just digging a hole for yourself if you post personal opinions out in public like that. You shouldn't do that.
Actually, we're about to switch to social media to discuss, so thank you for that segue. Wonderful, Dr. Knowles. Now, with social media, obviously you've got TikTok, you've got the Facebooks, you've got the Twitters, I think it's called X now. What does that look like for law enforcement? Because I know that it is a tool that is used at times. I do follow the PVD page just to make sure my husband's okay. But what's the balance of getting out into the community and letting your officers be seen as a part of the community and then sharing too much, and what does that look like? Everyone can answer. Not everyone at once.
When we started in law enforcement many years ago, there was no such thing as social media, no such thing as cell phones. I always laugh. I'm like, I think we did get rid of the horse and buggies in year 1 when you and I started, but we have upgraded a little bit. But so when we started law enforcement, this wasn't anything that we had encountered. And as we've moved into the administrative role, now we're dealing with this. Social media is a great platform when it's used right. We put a lot of information out there. The other part too is we do like to show that our officers are human. They're approachable. We do a lot of community policing events, and we do try to get our officers' pictures and stuff out there. even part of our hiring process, we go through people's social media accounts. They have to give us their passwords or allow us access so we can see what their social media is. You know, people put a lot of stuff out there and then they think, well, I can delete it. Once you put it out, it's permanent. So those are things that we do always watch, and especially with our officers. And as was said earlier, you kind of lose a little bit when you take a position like law enforcement. You kind of lose a little bit of your First Amendment sometimes. You can't put stuff out, just like what was said. You can't show any biases, political parties, religious parties, any of that. You've got to be fair across the board everywhere. You know, and those are things that we do have to run into sometimes. We do monitor it, and I can tell you I've had to have some of our officers take stuff down that they put up. It's been a little bit borderline. So we do try to monitor that really pretty good, and that, you know, our officers know they can't just go on there and do the TikTok while they're on the clock or do stuff like that. Because truly, I mean, it does make them sometimes look like they're engaging to the community, but that's what community policing is about. But you as a taxpayer or a citizen, it's taken that officer too long to get to your call, and you find out it's because they were around the corner doing the TikTok video. You can't stand up in front of a jury and say we were doing the right thing.
I'll echo that too as well. But one thing I would say is in regards to like your social media presence, it's not always what you post, it's what someone tags you in as well. So be very careful the people you surround yourself with and the people that you interact with, because what we told us to every cadet that came to the academy is like, it doesn't really matter if you post it, but if you're attached to it, like Dr. Noel said, it's perception. It becomes reality to people. So you have to be very careful what you see on your social media, what you allow people to tag you in. And I think that's one of the biggest things that has just changed drastically in the last, even in the last 5 years, what the amount of social media there is out there today. So pretty much just make sure it's that ethical piece, you know, you're always held to that higher standard. You don't really have that First Amendment right to go out and say whatever you want to anymore. You truly are held to a different standard.
They took all the good answers. So, really, all three of the departments, sounds like we're all on the same page as far as social media goes. And especially, and I don't mean to say it's not how this goes across, especially with your younger officers that are coming in that have grown up knowing nothing but social media, and it's just kind of part of their life. It tends maybe a little bit of extra instruction about how this has to separate. We had a sergeant, he's no longer with us, not because of this, but he was bodybuilder, really big guy, really great shape. Took a picture of himself in his patrol car, flexing muscly. He was going to work, wasn't at work. Great photograph. I'd love for the entire Lowndes County to think we're all built like that. I mean, it would have been fantastic. But I had to call him and said, hey, Sarge, great photo. You need to take that down. And he said, you know, you're right, I wasn't even thinking. So kudos to him for, you know, acknowledging those issues. But again, it's perception. I was going to say perception is reality. And that's true.
Now, with Dr. Wilson, Dr. Knowles, is that something that y'all, I know Dr. Wilson has been teaching since a lot of time, with dinosaurs. Dr. Wilson is much younger than Dr. Knowles. Is this something that is new in ethics of teaching the next law enforcement students? Is it something that y'all have had to create curriculum around in a sense? Or is it something that just kind of has flowed easily in your classrooms? Because I don't recall you teaching us social media in ethics.
It wasn't so aggravated and egregious problem back 35 years when you took classes with me. But I try to remind them that, you know, perception becomes reality. You got to be careful what you put out there. And I say, and I tell them, just as she just pointed out, both chiefs have pointed out, that you lose some of your First Amendment protections when you become a cop, because you're not speaking for yourself anymore. You're speaking for her, you're speaking for him, you're speaking for the lieutenant, you're speaking for the sheriff. You're not speaking for yourself. And it's just like university employees. state employees. Now, that's a little bit aggravating, but the point still remains that we have to be circumspect too. Whenever someone can, if they're trying to degrade you, let's put it that way, if there's that possibility, you gotta understand that somebody can very well take your words and try to imply that you're speaking for President Carvajal or Sheriff Paul or okay. So you have to be careful of that, and that's something we push forward. And ethics not like that. No overt lessons there. It's just that what you say becomes reality for some people, and there's enough people out there that are just sitting on pins and needles waiting to detract from the reputation of law enforcement in any community. And you don't want to give them ammunition unnecessarily because they're going to find it anyway. So just be careful about what you say and who you say it with. And that's true verbally. It's not just spoken word. I mean, you can't go to a bar. A lieutenant can't go to a bar and sit around with his buddies watching Monday Night Football and start slamming on the sheriff. People are going to hear that. That's not something you do.
I think that's a great question. I think in the classroom, it probably has been an evolution that probably should have been more intentional. I think when I think of social media and the ethical aspect, oftentimes, whether we realize it or not, we think that it's kind of like cooking, like that's figured out. It is covered significantly in any courses that deal with career development, career enhancement. I know that our career opportunities talk about that as well. So it does come in informally. I think it falls along the same lines in terms of artificial intelligence and what it means, how it's defined. What social media actually is the first step, and then second in terms of how it should be used and how it can be used. So, yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think organically it would flow in this class. I know that we cover it in our career-oriented courses where you have aspects of courses where you focus on career. And then we don't have a class in terms of social media etiquette. Something to consider too.
Now, you kind of touched on, just briefly touched on AI, and I know it's something that is newer, that's coming out. What type of situations are you encountering when it comes to AI? And as far as, like the license plate readers, is that AI? Is that, I know that's an effective tool. Facial recognition is an effective tool. So what type of situations are you encountering with AI, and how ethically is that being handled?
Well, from the academic standpoint, AI is our plague these days. We used to recommend various platforms to help you with your proofreading of your papers that you write for us. But we can't do that anymore because it turns out when they correct your grammar, if you cut and paste, then that's AI. Obviously it is, but we didn't do anything about AI. We were suggesting Grammarly and the like. They were just tools to help you become a better writer. So that is problematic, and we have that issue, especially in upper level courses where you're not graded on objective exams, you're graded on paper, so your ability to write, to articulate your ideas in writing, do it clearly. So, I was telling a class a couple of days ago, I'd rather have a bad paper with your name on it and it's all you. I'd rather have that C paper than an A paper that isn't you, because I don't really care what AI says about this topic. I care what you say about the topic. So we stress that all the time, and we have our own policies. My policy is if it comes back with an AI presence on your paper, I'll say we need to talk about this, and I'll give you an opportunity to rewrite it. As long as, but the second time it happens, I'm not going to be so sweet to you. I'm not going to let you rewrite it then. I'm going to let you have it one, because like Spider-Man says, everybody is one. So that's the problem there. But we push this a lot in ethics too, I believe. We were talking about the ethics the other day of the legal field, and I could point out to them there have been 3 cases that I know of through the American Bar Association where lawyers who went through their 4-year, through their 3 years of law school, put all that money and all that effort into it, and then passed the bar and got a lawyer's job in whatever firm somewhere, with all of that, and then they give a brief to the court that's written by AI because they took the easy way out, and it's got fallacious and false and fraudulent citations on it. And the clerk of the court finds that, and the judge says, that doesn't look like a real case. And the clerk says, that's not a real case. That never existed. And now we have those lawyers who are now paralegals and legal assistants despite all their education because they lost their law license. So that's, you make that point with students and it drives them home, even if they're not going to be a lawyer. You make that point and the severity of it in the field of criminal justice and it drives them home.
So I hope I stay on topic as far as what the question was, as far as AI goes. No. But I was kind of hitting my best before I answered. AI, it's something that we're all going to have to face at different levels, and especially as AI grows and more artificial intelligence. We're already facing it in some form or another. Talking about grammar. I recommend it to our officers because, trust me, it helps. And anyway, so for instance, I use ChatGPT sometimes when I'm doing research because it does research really quick, but I am responsible for any information that comes out of it. I have to do my own follow-up information on it. And because, for instance, that particular platform, it is a pleasing type of platform. It wants to make you happy. With the information it gives, just depending on how you word it. So you have to be aware of that. And so there's value in AI as a tool. My concern is that we begin replacing the human portion of the decision-making process by relying heavily on AI. And law enforcement's getting hit left and right. I'm sure that you all had vendors contacting y'all going, hey, we've got this new AI that can help with your report writing. And there's a very large company out there right now saying, listen, I need your body cam, everything that it got from there, we run it through this, it runs through AI, and you practically have the report written by the time it's over with. I'm not saying that is not going to be something in the future. Right now, I know I'm not comfortable with it, not because I don't trust the technology. What I don't trust is the person to proofread what they're reading because you're dealing with someone's life.
Amen.
And if that is not, the wording is just a comma not being in the right place or being intentional or the wrong word being in place, you can change the whole impact of that. And I'm not just talking about the person that maybe incarcerated, I'm talking about the victim also. If you write a bad report, you wind up victimizing somebody twice. So that's probably a really long answer on AI. And then, of course, you mentioned license plate readers, and I'm sure Suzanne will.
I will address that. Mike was mentioned license plate reader, the facial recognition. There are a lot of tools out there that are truly just investigative tools. Technology has its faults as well as humans do. So even though it's a tool, again, like Lieutenant Duke says, you can't just arrest somebody based off, well, that's what AI is telling me, that's what this program is telling me. You still have to have that human nature that you go back behind it and you verify it. You can't just send those reports. You use chat, I always call it chat GPT or whatever. I don't even know what it is. But when you have somebody do something for you, it's taking your heart out of it, it's taking your knowledge out of it. And then 2 years from now, you're on the stand testifying because you took somebody's freedom away. And now it's the first time you're really reading this report. And it's not what happened. Because you were there, you felt the emotions, you felt other things, and you didn't put it in the report. So it can be a good tool, but you've got to have that human nature and that human element that goes behind and just validates everything that you got from AI.
I agree with that. I would say that the human verification piece is the biggest piece. Just because you get someone, you get an image of them, and it looks like that person, you got to really do your background. You got to do the full investigation. You got to take that just as a tool. But I think the biggest piece that we're going to have to do moving forward is policy. The policy piece is going to drive AI for us because everything we're going to buy for the next 5 or 10 say, and I got to say that, like you said. So I think for us, it's just creating policy where we make sure they know what our guidelines are, what we can expect from that AI, and also just making sure they ensure the human verification piece of it. It's got to have that human act because so many things we do are so impactful in people's lives.
So we're gonna switch up a little bit, and Chris, I'd like for you to speak on it first. I know we live in a college area, we live in a college town, so I know all three departments somehow, some way will end up on campus, handling situations. What type of ethical or legal issues do you run into on campus, and what does it look like? Because you've got kids that are 18 years old, they are fresh out of, mom and dad's house, they're on their own. What type of, I don't want to say leniency, but what type of leniency do you give? I mean, is there a policy on that, or is it kind of just based on just your officer's judgment?
Well, it's definitely on the officer's discretion. I would say that the biggest piece to this is that these are 18, 19-year-old kids, and they're learning accountability. So, while we can't hold them to a standard, I would say that don't look at leniency as favoritism. You know what I'm saying? So look at it as like, hey, we're giving them a chance to educate them first. And that's sort of how we look at this, is protect, serve, and educate them from our side of things. But leniency is not favoritism. We're giving them a chance. I always tell our guys that, they come here for 4 years, and our job is to get them across the stage, just like our roles is in them as well, is to get them across that stage. And so if we can do that without giving them a record, we're going to do it.
If anyone can answer that one, I just wanted you to start off this.
Same, we deal with them, and a lot of students in the city as well. And again, some crimes, depending on what they are, there is officer discretion. Unfortunately, there are crimes that kind of take it out of the hands that we don't have a choice. We do have to take action. But the biggest thing too is we want to ensure that the students here, as well as all of our citizens, are able to have, hopefully a crime-free experience and feel safe wherever they're at.
So because we are talking about ethics, I think there's a learning point here also. We're talking about officer discretion. And of course, we're talking about campus, but your folks come off campus also, right? And you have an officer that winds up encountering somebody that's sick for underage possession of alcohol. Depending upon the totality of the circumstances, this may be a great time for that kid to learn something without wanting to get a criminal record. It's also a great opportunity with your young law enforcement officers when they come out, because they are eager to go out there and show that they know how to do the job. It's a good time for your senior law enforcement officers to have sidebar conversations with them, going, okay, what is our objective? What are we actually wanting to accomplish here? Are we just wanting to make an arrest, or we want to have an impact as far as society goes? And there are further ethical things when you start talking about officer discretion. Because someone came from a well-to-do, and they're 18-year-old, and they're out there doing what 18-year-olds do, does that look different than from someone that came from more or less fortunate? Having those conversations with that officer, again, what are we trying to achieve? Because if they learn it now, as far as their objectivity, their discretion becomes better as they get seasoned as an officer. And they can start looking at the big picture. Obviously, like Chief Mann talked about, the more serious crimes, they've got to be dealt with. But some of your low-level crimes, you can get the impact that you're wanting to get without the cost of a criminal history, without the cost of the taxpayers, incarceration, probation, and the list goes on. So.
Hey, and I think we have just one last one, and I saved this one for last, because I know that there's a different standard amongst agencies, and different opinions. Can we talk about the standards and ethics of giving
So, the sheriff's office policy with chases is different. But I want to caveat that with, because of the environment. If our sole jurisdiction was working in the city, I would dare say that our policy would mirror very close to what BPD does, because you're in a more congested area. We have criteria that is, just like with force, it has to be objectively reasonable. We have to look at all these criteria as far as the chase goes. And we put a lot of trust in our officers to use good discretion, when to back off, when to push, when to do a hit maneuver, which is basically spinning the vehicle out. We've actually changed our policy recently, where you used to have the supervisor had to get approval. You had to get approval from the supervisor to do a hit maneuver. And we had to reevaluate that because the supervisor's not on the scene. He's not the one right there. And so by the time that you get the approval, that small window of being able to end it before it gets bigger may have come and gone. There's a Supreme Court case called Scott v. Harris, and it's a fascinating case. It winds up touching upon everything, but the primary focus on it was about a case that occurred here in Georgia, wound up going to the Supreme Court. And one of the key phrases out of there was that the Supreme Court was heavily concerned about placing restrictions on law enforcement chasing vehicles that were trying to get away, especially putting people at risk, because it would convey the message that as long as I go a certain speed over, as long as I weave in and out a little bit, the law enforcement's going to back off and I'll be able to get away. That's a fine balancing act, and that means that there's really no guidance from the agency. The agency has to write a policy for their area, for their jurisdiction, for their area that best fits the needs for the people that they're supposed to serve and protect, to take from the doctrine. So for us, especially when we're outside on the interstates, which I know that we get into those quite frequently, that we wind up having a much more aggressive policy as far as the law will go. We will stop them. Because there has been areas that have had absolutely no chase policies, and it's been catastrophic in the areas where people just keep going. But a short story, something had happened somewhere, and this was years ago, and I was involved in a chase a few blocks down. And I was a partner in the vehicle, and I told my partner, hey, back off, stop. Let's back off on this vehicle a little bit. And we did. We did back off. And we lost sight. As I made up that time, came around, the gentleman had continued to go, had continued to drive recklessly because he did not know if we were changing tactics, apparently, or what. And he hit a fire hydrant. That the fire hydrant went and hit a person that was walking across the side of the road. So it's one of those things that, do you or do you not? And it really comes to the person inside the car and looking at the totality of what's going on. So even when you try to be more conservative, sometimes it backfires.
One story to illustrate what Lieutenant Deuce was saying, because it happens in a lot of agencies, but there's a point to be made here. We had a car chase down in Brandon, which is a metropolitan area now. It used to be a suburban area out east of Tampa there. And it was part of the sheriff's office jurisdiction. It was an entirely legitimate car chase going on. I mean, our guy was doing the right thing by procedure, and we were trying to wedge the guy in. And unfortunately, the bad guy hit an uninvolved civilian trying to get through an intersection and killed the poor civilian. And of course, now the family, even though we were doing everything right, and they really should have the authority to do this, the family of the victim is not going to sue the bad guy. The family of the victim is going to reason logically that if you weren't chasing the bad guy, he wouldn't have run into our uncle. And they got a point. They do have a point. I guess the point I'm trying to make in all this, because the chase brings up this liability a whole lot. It doesn't matter if you do everything right. In law enforcement, there's still that overarching liability there that you can be sued. And hopefully, if you do everything right, it'll be an unsuccessful suit. But nonetheless, in this case, we did everything right, but we still owed money. anything goes wrong. I myself, when I retired down there, Internal Affairs asked me to come over and take custody of my file cabinet because I had been sued. In 20 years, I've been sued 27 times in court for civil rights violations, and I was never guilty of any of them. But people can sue. I mean, nothing keeps anyone from suing you about anything. So that was a big joke. I left. They got more room than I had.
Absolutely.